You won't win this! That won't hurt!
Watch the ground!
You can keep filing complaints, Daniel. My son isn't moving his SUV. The board already decided. Karen Whitfield, vice president of the Cedar Hollow Estates HOA, said it with a thin smile, standing on my crushed front lawn while her son's massive black SUV sat right on the roots of my oak tree. "This isn't your property," I said. She shrugged. "Prove it, or pay the fines." What she didn't expect was me replying, calmly, "That patch of land is a protected drainage buffer tied to the city's stormwater system, and I helped write the compliance standards for it." The smile on her face hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Not gone, just shaken. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm a civil engineer and former municipal zoning consultant. That ground she was standing on isn't just grass to me. My father buried a time capsule there the week before he died, right under the oak sapling we planted together. That tree and that soil are the last place I ever stood beside him, hands dirty, laughing at nothing important. Karen didn't know that. She only saw space for her son's oversized ego on 4 wheels. Every day after that, Evan Whitfield parked his SUV on my lawn. Every single day. I watched the tires grind deeper into the earth, the oak's leaves yellowing, the soil compacting until rainwater pooled where it never used to. Karen sent me violation letters for the damage her son caused. Late fees, warnings, threats of liens. It felt like they were trying to erase my father a tire track at a time. If this kind of HOA power abuse makes your blood boil too, stick with me. Because by the end of this story, you'll watch my wife bury that SUV in 3 tons of mulch and see Karen Whitfield completely lose control. And seriously, where are you watching from? I stood there as Karen walked away that morning, the wind off the lake cutting cold through my jacket, my hands shaking with a mix of fury and something else. Something steadier. Rebecca came outside and put her hand in mine. I could hear the oak's leaves rustling above us, weak, struggling. Evan's engine roared as he pulled away, leaving behind deep black grooves in the ground. I knelt and pressed my palm to the soil. It felt wrong, too hard, too dry. The land was changing. That night, I sat on the porch steps, listening to cicadas and the distant splash of water against the docks, watching the moon creep over Cedar Hollow Estates. Rebecca brought me coffee. I told her everything Karen had said. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and said, "They picked the wrong house." The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the yard with a measuring tape and a notebook. The oak's trunk, the slope of the lawn, the runoff path toward the storm drain. My professional brain kicked in automatically, even while my chest stayed tight. This wasn't just petty harassment. They were creating a liability nightmare for the entire street. If that buffer failed, the water would back up into 3 neighboring properties, maybe more. Around noon, Evan's SUV rolled in again. Same time, same place. I stood by the window and watched the suspension bounce as he climbed the curb and crushed the grass. Karen's curtains twitched across the street. I walked outside. The smell of exhaust mixed with cut grass and lake water. I placed a bright orange survey flag right next to his rear tire. Then another, and another, marking the root zone of the oak and the slope of the drainage channel. Evan didn't even look at me as he got out and went inside Karen's house. That was when I understood something important. They weren't just ignoring the rules, they were daring me to do something about it. That afternoon, I called an old colleague from my zoning days. We talked runoff coefficients, soil compaction thresholds, and buffer protections. I didn't tell him about Karen. I didn't need to. I already knew the direction this was heading. The violation letters piling on my kitchen counter, the oak shedding leaves in early summer, the time capsule resting under soil that was no longer stable. When Rebecca came home, I showed her the flags and the measurements. She nodded, slow and deliberate. "Then we do this right," she said, "all the way." As the sun dropped behind the lake and the streetlights flickered on, I stood on my porch staring at Evan's SUV, parked on my father's ground like it owned it. The quiet felt heavy, not peaceful, loaded. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones, in the soil under my boots, in the leaves of that struggling oak. They thought this was about parking. They had no idea what they'd just started. That thought stayed with me as the night air cooled and the street went quiet. I didn't go inside. I stayed on the porch until the last porch light down the block clicked off. until the lake beyond the houses turned into a sheet of black glass. When I finally stepped inside, Rebecca was already at the kitchen table, the violation letters spread out like a bad hand of cards. She looked up, searching my face. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't need to. We both knew the line had been crossed. The next morning, I drove to the community walking path that curves along the water behind Cedar Hollow Estates. The HOA loved to pretend it was a symbol of harmony. That was where the neighbors walked their dogs, pushed strollers, complained in low voices, and watched each other with the careful politeness that hides pressure. I started my loop, and within minutes I ran into Mrs. Holloway from 3 houses down. Her smile faded the moment she saw my face. She told me about the letter she'd received last week for a bird feeder that wasn't even visible from the street, then about the warning Mr. Benton got for having his garage door open while unloading groceries. Then about the fine the Ramirez family paid because their trash bin was out for 12 extra minutes. The more we walked, the more names came up. Every story circled back to the same source. Karen Whitfield, vice president of the HOA board, self-appointed sheriff of Cedar Hollow. By the time I reached the end of the path, my chest felt tight and hot. This wasn't enforcement. It was control. The SUV on my lawn was only the most visible piece of it. When I got home, Evan's SUV was already there again, right on the oak's root line, its shadow cutting across the grass. I could see fresh soil crushed into the grooves. I knelt, pressed my fingers into the dirt, and felt the compaction spread outward from the tire like a bruise. That kind of pressure collapses pore spaces. Water stops draining, roots suffocate. I stood slowly, anger climbing up my spine. That afternoon, I went to the Marina Cafe by the lake, the one place in the neighborhood where people still spoke freely. Over coffee that tasted like burnt pennies, I listened to story after story, towed cars for no reason, selective fines, threats of liens. Karen's name surfaced again and again. The community wasn't just uncomfortable, it was scared. By evening, my phone buzzed. Another violation notice had been emailed. Unauthorized ground markings, it said. The orange flags I'd placed that morning were now grounds for a fine. I laughed, a sharp sound that startled Rebecca. She took the phone from my hand and read the message. Her jaw set. They're escalating. I didn't answer. I was already thinking about soil density ratios, runoff coefficients, buffer requirements, and the way this slope directed water toward the storm drain at the corner of the block. This wasn't abstract. This was my field. And the more Karen pushed, the clearer the picture became. The next morning I went to work, but I couldn't focus. During lunch I pulled up city diagrams in my head, remembered the planning meetings from years ago, the arguments over buffer enforcement and erosion controls. Cedar Hollow had been flagged back then as sensitive land. The oak on my lawn wasn't just a tree, it marked the edge of a drainage protection zone tied to the entire street's stormwater management. Parking a 2-ton vehicle on it wasn't just rude, it was dangerous. When I came home, Evan's SUV was gone for once. In its place was a fresh letter taped to my door, another fine, another warning, Karen's handwriting sharp and confident at the bottom. That night, I walked the neighborhood. Not the path this time, but the streets, porch to porch, door to door. I listened more than I spoke. The anger was there, simmering under the surface. No one trusted the board anymore. No one felt safe. And everyone had the same question. How far could Karen go? When I returned home, Rebecca was in the yard, crouched near the oak. She brushed soil from the trunk and looked up at me. "The leaves are falling early," she said. I knelt beside her. The bark was dry. The ground was hard. The damage was accelerating. I squeezed her hand. "They don't realize it yet," I said, staring at the dark line of crushed grass where the SUV always sat. "But they've created a problem they can't control." Inside, I spread the letters across the table again. Not as evidence, not yet, but as a map of the pressure. Every fine, every threat, every overreach. The pattern was undeniable, and buried beneath it all, the real issue waited in the soil, in the slope, in the oak's struggling roots, in the engineering rules Karen had chosen to ignore. I looked at Rebecca. "This is bigger than us now." She nodded. "Good." Rebecca's words still echoed in my head as I drove the next morning toward the HOA maintenance yard, the low chain-link enclosure tucked behind the tennis courts where the community stored its mowers, utility carts, and stacks of sod. The sky hung gray and heavy, the air smelling like rain that hadn't decided whether to fall. I parked across the street and sat there a moment, watching. Tom Alvarez was already inside the yard. He stood beside one of the riding mowers with his hands on the steering wheel, not moving. His shoulders were slumped, his head was bowed. He looked like a man holding something too heavy for one's spine. When he finally noticed me, his eyes flicked up and then away. He wiped his palms on his work pants and pretended to adjust the mower blade. I walked to the fence. "Morning, Tom." He flinched at my voice, then forced a nod. "Morning, Daniel." The gate was open. I stepped inside. The smell of fuel, wet grass, and metal filled the space. Tom's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. His foot tapped once, then again, the motion nervous and restrained. "I wanted to ask about the oak," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You've seen the damage." He nodded too quickly, then shook his head as if correcting himself. His shoulders rose, then fell. He crossed his arms, uncrossed them, folded them behind his back. The struggle showed in every movement. "That tree. It's not doing well," I continued. "The soil's compacted. The drainage path's changing. You know that." Tom looked at the fence, then at the ground, then at the mower again. His lips parted, closed. He swallowed. "Yeah," he said quietly. A long silence stretched between us. A truck passed on the road. Somewhere behind the courts, a ball smacked against concrete. "They're going to blame me," he muttered. "Who is?" I asked. He rubbed his face, fingers dragging down over tired eyes. "The board, if this goes bad, if the water backs up, if someone's basement floods." His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat. "They always need someone to blame." His gaze finally met mine. There was fear there, and guilt, and something else. Relief, maybe, at not carrying it alone. "I've seen him park there," Tom said. "Every day. Evan, right on your grass." I told her it wasn't allowed. "Karen," I said. He nodded once, hard. "She said to ignore it, said it was temporary. Then she told me to keep writing you up, said if I didn't, I'd be looking for another job." His hands were shaking now. He jammed them into his pockets, pulled them out, clenched them into fists. The wind rattled the chain-link fence. "Tom," I said, "you know what that land is?" Another nod, slower this time. "Drainage buffer. Root zone protection. I took the training. We all did." I exhaled slowly. This was it. The first real crack. He leaned against the mower like it was the only thing holding him up. "I didn't sign up for this," he whispered. "I just wanted to cut grass and go home." "I know." He stared at the far wall of the yard. His shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him, replaced by something steadier. Decision. "I kept records," he said. Not documents in a drawer, not secret files, just the daily logs he was required to maintain. Dates, notes, observations. The routine truth of the job. "I can't give them to you," he added quickly. "Not yet, but I can tell you what I saw, and when." "That's enough," I said. He nodded. Then he did something that surprised me. He straightened, squared his shoulders, met my eyes. The fear was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. "You're not wrong," he said. "They're abusing the rules." I held his gaze. "This is bigger than fines and letters now." He breathed out through his nose. "Yeah." I stepped back toward the gate. "If this matters to you," I said, "stick with me." He didn't answer right away. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. Another HOA notice. Another fine. I didn't even open it. Before I drove off, I turned the camera on my dashboard toward myself. The anger, the fear, the pressure of it all was written across my face. "If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thinks it owns your life," I said quietly, "hit subscribe. This isn't just my fight anymore. It's for anyone who's been pushed around by people who think rules are weapons." I ended the recording, started the engine, and pulled away. In my mirror, I saw Tom still standing by the mower, watching me go. The line had been crossed. I kept seeing Tom's face in the rearview mirror, long after I'd turned onto the main road. His shoulders, the way they finally squared. The way fear didn't vanish, but stepped aside. By the time I reached the HOA office that afternoon, my hands were steady on the wheel. Whatever Karen Whitfield thought this was, it was about to stop being one-sided. The office sat near the clubhouse. Beige brick, wide windows, a plaque by the door listing the board members' names. I paused under it long enough to read Karen's title again. Vice President. It still burned. Inside, the air smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. A young receptionist looked up from her computer and froze when she recognized me. "I'm here to speak with Karen," I said. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "She's in a meeting." "I'll wait." I took a seat. The room was quiet except for the hum of a printer and the distant slap of a tennis ball outside. A few minutes passed. Then Karen's voice drifted from behind a closed door, sharp, confident, slicing through the hallway. When she finally emerged, her eyes flicked to me. She didn't hide her irritation. "This again? You've sent me 3 new violation notices since yesterday," I said. She smiled. Not warm, not kind. "You keep breaking the rules you ignore for your son." Her smile tightened. "Be careful." "I am." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We can put a lien on your property, Daniel. We can make this very uncomfortable." The word lien echoed in my head. My father's house, the oak, the capsule beneath the soil. I felt the pressure rise, then settle. "Your threats don't change physics," I said. Her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your son's SUV is compacting protected soil and altering drainage. You're creating liability for the entire block." She laughed softly. "You're not an engineer here. You're a homeowner." I met her eyes. "I'm both." She turned away, dismissing me, already calling out instructions to the receptionist about adding late fees. Outside, the sun was low and hot. I stood on the steps of the office and looked across the parking lot. 2 neighbors were approaching, Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Benton. They didn't speak at first. They didn't have to. "She sent me another letter," Mrs. Holloway said. Mr. Benton nodded. "Told me my fence needs replacing. It's brand new." We stood there together, 3 houses, 3 stories, 1 pattern. That was the moment it stopped feeling isolated. The HOA's behavior wasn't accidental. It was systematic. I went home to find Evan's SUV already parked on my lawn again. The oak's leaves lay scattered like tired hands across the ground. I crouched, ran my fingers over the grooves the tires had carved, then along the slope where rainwater now pooled in a shallow arc. The land was responding exactly the way the textbooks said it would. That night, the rain finally came. Not hard, just enough. I stood at the window and watched the water creep where it shouldn't, sliding along the compacted soil instead of sinking in. The storm drain at the corner gurgled, struggling. I thought about the houses downhill, the families, the basements. The next morning, I returned to the HOA office with photos on my phone, not as evidence, not yet, but as confirmation. Karen was waiting for me this time. "You're done harassing this office," she said. "I'm done being harassed by it." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "We're raising your fines." "For damage you're causing." "Prove it." Her words landed differently now. "Prove it." The challenge. The opening. I left without another word. Back at the lake, I walked the community path again. People stopped me this time, quietly, quickly. Stories spilled out. Warnings, tows, threats. One woman's voice shook as she spoke about losing sleep over foreclosure notices. The anger wasn't loud. It was heavy. That evening, Rebecca and I stood beside the oak as the light faded. The air smelled like wet leaves and soil. I told her about Karen's threat, about the lien. "She's pushing too far," Rebecca said. "Yes," I replied, "and she's doing it in a way that intersects with my field in a very bad way." Rebecca studied the ground, then the slope, then the storm drain in the distance. Her eyes followed the same path mine had. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking she's created the exact conditions that city codes were written to prevent," I said, "and she's done it openly." Rebecca's hand slipped into mine. "Then we don't stop her. We let her keep going." The rain clouds gathered again over the lake, dark and slow. By morning they had broken, leaving the air heavy and the ground soaked. I drove straight from home to my engineering firm's field office downtown, the wipers whispering back and forth while my mind stayed fixed on the slope of my lawn, the oak's tired leaves, the way the water had refused to sink. The building's concrete exterior always felt sterile, but that day it felt like sanctuary. Inside, the familiar scent of paper, toner, and old coffee steadied me. I dropped my jacket over the back of my chair and pulled out the site maps we kept archived from Cedar Hollow's original development. Not documents hidden in a drawer or anything secret. just the professional records I had helped review years ago when the subdivision was approved. My screen filled with contour lines, drainage paths, soil classifications. My chest tightened as the pieces aligned exactly the way I had feared. Cedar Hollow Estate sat on layered clay and loam, fragile when compacted. The buffer zones around each lot weren't cosmetic. They were engineered safeguards. The oak on my property marked the edge of a protected drainage corridor designed to funnel runoff safely toward the storm basin. The corridor extended beneath my lawn, under Evan's tire tracks, toward 3 downhill homes. The calculations were brutal in their clarity. Continued compaction would force water sideways, not down. Basements would flood, foundations would crack, the HOA's insurance would implode. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling while the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above me. Karen's smug smile at the HOA office came back to me, her voice saying, "Prove it." I didn't need to prove anything yet. I only needed to understand the full scope of what she'd done, and now I did. I spent the next 2 hours recreating the runoff model in my head, checking rainfall averages, slope grades, and soil absorption rates from memory. The numbers didn't just support my instincts, they amplified them. What she'd allowed wasn't a nuisance, it was structural negligence. Around noon, my colleague Sam walked by my desk, coffee in hand. He paused when he saw the Cedar Hollow plat on my screen. "Didn't you used to live out there?" he asked. "I still do," I replied. He frowned at the map. "That buffer's sensitive. Why are you looking at it?" I told him about the SUV, the fines, the oak, the slope. I didn't mention Karen by name yet. I didn't need to. He listened, brows knitting tighter with each sentence. "That's bad," he said finally. "If the HOA's knowingly allowing that, they're asking for a lawsuit." I nodded. They are. When I left the office later that afternoon, the sky had cleared, the sun sharp and bright. I drove home slowly, replaying everything in my mind, the equations, the risk, the quiet inevitability of what would happen if the damage continued. Evan's SUV was already back on my lawn, its tires gleaming wet in the light. I walked the edge of the property, boots sinking into soft spots that shouldn't have been there. I could hear the faint trickle of water beneath the surface, forced sideways by the compacted soil, my field, my rules, my nightmare. Rebecca came out with 2 bottles of water. We sat on the porch steps, watching the SUV, listening to the distant hum of lawnmowers from somewhere down the block. "She's creating a catastrophic liability," I said, "and she doesn't even know it." Rebecca's eyes stayed on the oak. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we stop reacting," I replied, "and we start moving with precision." She nodded once. No hesitation, no fear, just resolve. Before going inside, I pulled my phone out and recorded another short message. My voice was calm, but the anger under it was unmistakable. If you're tired of watching powerful people abuse their position and think nobody can stop them, follow this story. Subscribe and stay with me. You're about to see what happens when professional knowledge meets raw persistence. I ended the recording, slipped the phone into my pocket, and stood. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, wrong, but now I knew exactly why. Inside, I opened my notebook and began sketching the path forward, not with emotion, with engineering. The first step had revealed itself clearly, and Karen Whitfield had no idea what she'd set in motion. I closed the notebook and didn't touch it again that night. Instead, before dawn, I drove past Cedar Hollow and up the narrow service road that climbed behind the old city reservoir. It was a place I'd studied for years on blueprints and hydrology models, but rarely visited in person. The sky was pale and bruised with leftover clouds from the storm. The wind smelled like wet stone and algae. Below me, the water surface was perfectly still, a massive controlled system holding back more force than most people ever realized. I stood at the railing and thought about runoff, about where water wanted to go, about what happened when humans pretended gravity and soil chemistry were optional. This wasn't anger now, it was clarity. My phone buzzed. A message from Tom. Just one line. "She's talking about filing a lien today." The word lien cut straight through me. I looked back toward the east, imagining the oak, the crushed soil, the time capsule beneath it. Karen was accelerating, which meant I had to as well. By mid-morning, I was at the public overlook on the ridge above Cedar Hollow, a place where you could see the entire neighborhood folded around the lake like a blueprint made real. From up there, the drainage patterns were visible even to the untrained eye. The slope from my property, the narrow channel leading toward the storm basin, the vulnerable homes below. I pulled my phone out and recorded the water still pooled in places it had no business being. No documents, no files, just direct observation of a system beginning to fail. When I got home, Evan's SUV was gone for once, leaving behind the deepest tire marks yet. Rebecca met me at the door, worry etched across her face. "She sent another notice," she said. "Final warning before lien proceedings." I didn't take the paper from her. I walked straight past the oak, knelt, and pressed my palm into the ground. It felt spongy near the edges, rock hard where the tires had been. The soil structure was collapsing. The damage was no longer theoretical. It was happening in real time. Rebecca crouched beside me. "Talk to me." "She's forcing the issue," I said. "The buffer's already compromised. One more heavy rain, and the water's going to move sideways." Her jaw tightened. "Toward the Bentons, and the Ramirez place, and Holloway's." She stared at the slope. "We don't have time, do we?" "No," I replied. That was the moment the decision locked in. Not in anger, not in fear, in responsibility. By afternoon, I was back on the road, this time to the Municipal Field Inspection Training Center across town. The building was a squat brick structure with faded signage and the smell of dust and hot concrete. I met with a former colleague in the parking lot. We walked the edge of the retention ponds behind the building, talking about soil compaction, buffer violations, and the way HOAs love to pretend they were above physics. "Let me guess," he said. "They think it's cosmetic." I nodded. "They always do." He gestured to the pond, its banks layered with erosion control mesh. "Water doesn't care about bylaws." Neither did I. When I finally returned to Cedar Hollow, the late sun was bleeding across the lake. The oak's leaves fluttered weakly in the breeze. The lawn looked wounded. I stood there for a long time, hearing my father's voice in my head, the way he'd said, "Land remembers how you treat it." Rebecca joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "What happens now?" I exhaled slowly. "Now we stop playing defense." She didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. Inside, I opened the notebook again and began outlining what had to happen before the next storm arrived. The plan wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring the land, protecting the houses below us, and forcing accountability on a board that had lost its way. The sound of an engine rolled in from the street. Evan's SUV, right on schedule. I looked out the window as he parked on my lawn again, the tires sinking into the weakened soil like a final insult. I closed the notebook. Karen had chosen escalation. So had I. The next morning, I didn't wait for the mail or the next violation email. I drove straight to the old Riverside picnic lot on the far edge of Cedar Hollow, the one with the cracked concrete tables and rusted grills where hardly anyone ever went anymore. It was quiet there. The river sliding past, slow and brown, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Tom Alvarez was already waiting near the water, standing with his back to me, hands jammed in his pockets, shoulders tight like he'd been holding his breath for hours. He didn't turn right away when I walked up. I could see his jaw working, the muscles in his neck twitching. Finally, he exhaled and faced me. "I almost didn't come," he said. "I'm glad you did." He nodded once, then looked past me at the river. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that I just worked there, that it wasn't my fight. His hands came out of his pockets, and he rubbed them together, slow, rough, like he was trying to scrape something off his skin. "But then I saw your oak yesterday, the leaves on the ground, the roots starting to show." My chest tightened. "You know what that tree is to me." He swallowed. "I do now." We sat on the edge of one of the tables. The concrete was warm from the sun. The river smelled like mud and summer heat. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Tom said quietly. "Cancer. Fast. 1 month she was fine, the next—" He shook his head. "She used to walk the neighborhood every morning, always stopped by that oak. Said it reminded her of the one in her grandmother's yard back in Texas. The only place she ever felt safe as a kid." His voice cracked and he cleared it, breathing hard. "After she died, I'd go there at lunch, sit under that tree. Felt like she was close." I stared at the river, the current dragging small branches downstream. "I didn't know." "Karen did," he said. "I told her once, when the board first talked about loosening parking enforcement. I told her that ground mattered. That tree mattered. What did she say? He let out a hollow laugh. She said feelings don't show up in the bylaws. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I tried to stop it. Tom went on. When Evan started parking there, I told her it violated the buffer zone. I told her the soil would compact. I told her the water would shift. I showed her the runoff path with my own hands. He lifted them now, palms up, trembling. She told me if I wanted to keep my job, I'd stop bringing it up. My jaw tightened. She ordered me to keep writing you up, he said. Said the fines would break you faster than any argument. I hated it, Daniel. Every time I filled one out, I felt like I was helping tear something out of the ground that didn't belong to me. I looked at him, really looked, the exhaustion in his eyes, the guilt etched into every line of his face. There's more, he said. Last week, when it rained, I walked the drainage path behind your place. The water was already creeping sideways, toward the Benton's foundation. Another storm like that, their basement's going under. My chest felt hollow. Did you tell her? Yes. He nodded hard. She said if the Bentons flooded, the HOA insurance would handle it. She didn't care. I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, the river seemed louder. I can't keep pretending, Tom said. I won't. I'll tell anyone who needs to hear it. The board, the city, whoever. I don't care if I lose the job. I already lost too much. I reached out and gripped his shoulder. This isn't just about property, I said. It never was. He met my eyes. I know. We sat there a while longer, the sun climbing higher, the cicadas screaming like they were trying to warn the world. When I finally stood, Tom stood with me. His shoulders were straighter than I'd ever seen them. She's crossing lines she can't uncross, he said. Yes, I replied, and now she's not doing it in the dark. I walked back to my car with the weight of everything he'd said pressing on my chest. The oak, my father, Tom's wife, the houses downhill, the water already shifting its path, Karen's threat of a lien, the SUV's tires grinding the soil into something that could no longer protect anyone. By the time I pulled away from the river, my hands were steady on the wheel again. This had become something larger than a fight with an HOA. This had become a responsibility. I drove straight from the river to the city permitting office downtown, a low concrete building wedged between a courthouse annex and a row of dry cleaners. The kind of place most people only enter when something in their life has already gone wrong. The lobby smelled like paper and old coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A digital board ticked through ticket numbers with mechanical indifference. I took a seat, replaying everything Tom had told me. His wife, the oak, the Benton's foundation, the runoff already shifting its path, the SUV sinking deeper into soil that was never meant to carry that kind of weight, Karen's threats, her arrogance, her assumption that power meant immunity. When my number appeared, I approached the counter and spoke calmly, carefully, the way engineers learn to do when they know precision matters more than volume. I described the compaction, the slope, the buffer corridor, the drainage redirection. No accusations, no names, just facts. The clerk's eyes narrowed as she typed. She printed a form, slid it across, and told me what category my request fell under. Emergency soil remediation and erosion control, she said. You'll need an on-site assessment before approval. How soon? I asked. She checked the calendar. Tomorrow morning. That was faster than I'd hoped, faster than Karen expected. I walked out into the heat, my shirt sticking to my back, my mind already shifting into planning mode. The victory strategy wasn't some dramatic gesture. It was methodical, professional, irrefutable. Expose the wrongdoing by forcing it into the light of codes and standards Karen had ignored. When I got home, Rebecca was waiting at the kitchen table. I told her everything, the permit category, the assessment, the timeline. She listened without interrupting, her fingers curled around her mug. What do you need from me? She asked. Your nerve, I said, and your signature when the time comes. She smiled faintly. You already have both. That evening, we walked the lawn together. The oak's bark was rough beneath my palm. I told her about Tom's wife, about how he'd sit under this tree at lunch. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the smell of the leaves. Then we protect it, she said. I nodded. Before we went inside, I recorded another short message on my phone, the lake glowing gold behind me. This story isn't just about one man and one HOA. It's about what happens when people decide the rules don't apply to them and someone finally says no. Subscribe and stay with us. The next step changes everything. I slipped the phone away, feeling the tension coil and sharpen. The next morning, the city inspector arrived just after 8, middle-aged, sunburned, boots dusty, clipboard under his arm. He followed me across the lawn, knelt, pressed his own palm into the compacted soil, frowned. He traced the runoff path with his eyes, then stood slowly. "This buffer's compromised," he said, severely. "Yes," I replied. "Vehicle parking here violates city ordinance." "I know." He made notes. Measured slope. Took photos, walked downhill toward the Benton's place, then back again. When he finished, he looked at me with the weary seriousness of someone who'd seen this kind of negligence too many times. "You're eligible for emergency remediation," he said. "We'll fast-track the permit. You'll need licensed contractors, soil stabilization, mulch, lots of it." "How much?" 3 tons at least. The number landed like a bell in my chest. By noon, the permit was in my email. Rebecca read it with me at the table, our heads close, the words sharp and official on the screen. "Once this starts," she said, "there's no stopping it." That's the point. Outside, Evan's SUV rolled onto the lawn again, right on cue. The tires sank slightly into the weakened ground, a silent admission of everything Karen refused to acknowledge. I watched from the window, the permit glowing on my phone in my hand, the oak's leaves trembling in the breeze. The trap wasn't cruel, it was lawful, and it was ready. Karen had no idea what she was about to witness. I didn't sleep much that night. The permit sat open on my phone beside the bed, its language clean and unarguable, every line a small shield against the chaos I knew was coming. Before sunrise, I was already in the truck, driving across town to the commercial landscaping supply yard on the industrial edge of the city. The place was loud, metallic, and busy, forklifts whining, diesel engines coughing, the smell of fresh bark and soil thick in the air. I walked between towering stacks of mulch bags, my boots crunching on spilled gravel, the sound of it sharp and steady. A foreman with a clipboard listened as I explained the scope of the job. I showed him the permit. His eyebrows rose when he read the words, "emergency remediation." 3 tons is no joke, he said. "I know." He nodded once, already signaling to his crew. No drama, no questions, just work. By mid-morning, the convoy was scheduled. When I got back to Cedar Hollow, Tom was waiting near the walking path, leaning against his truck. He looked up as I pulled in, his posture stiff but resolved. I told him what I had arranged. His eyes widened, then slowly filled with something like relief. "She's going to explode," he said. "That's her choice." He exhaled. "I'll be around." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. The rest of the day moved in careful steps. Rebecca handled the house, quietly moving anything we didn't want in the yard. I paced the lawn, marking boundaries, checking the oak's roots, tracing the drainage slope again and again. Evan's SUV arrived and parked on the grass like it always did, its shadow long and careless. Late afternoon, Karen appeared across the street, arms crossed, staring at the yard, then at me. I held her gaze. She turned away, satisfied, certain she still controlled the board. That evening, the sky burned orange over the lake. The wind picked up, rattling the oak's leaves. Rebecca and I stood on the porch, the permit in her hand, the future in both of our eyes. "This is going to change everything," she said. "Yes," I replied. After dark, the first truck rolled in, parking 2 houses down to avoid attention. The driver kept the engine idling low. Another followed, then another. I stood at the curb with the foreman, speaking quietly, reviewing the sequence. They would arrive early before Karen left for work, before the board could react. I went inside long enough to leave the kitchen light on, a small normal thing in the middle of what felt like the eye of a storm. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. "Tom," just one word. "Ready?" I replied the same. When I finally lay down, I didn't close my eyes. I listened to the house breathe, to the distant hum of traffic, to the oak's branches shifting in the wind. I thought about my father, about Tom's wife, about the Benton's basement, about the water waiting for gravity to have its say. Before dawn, I was back on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the street lighten. Evan's SUV still sat on the lawn, dew coating its windows, the tires pressed deep into soil that had no strength left. At 6 sharp, the first truck pulled in, then the second, then the third. Engines rumbled, diesel smoke curling into the cool air. The foreman stepped out, nodded to me. "Permit," he said. I handed it over. He glanced at it, then passed it to his crew. Rebecca came out, wrapped in a sweater, her face calm. The sun crested the rooftops as the first load of mulch rose on the forklift, dark and heavy against the sky. I felt my pulse steady, the plan moving from idea to motion. Across the street, Karen's curtains twitched. I stood at the edge of the lawn, the oak behind me, the future in front of me, the weight of every choice we'd made pressing down, not as fear, but as purpose. Everything was in place. The first dump truck eased forward, its tires whispering over the pavement as if even the machine understood this moment needed precision, not noise. The foreman raised his hand. The forklift rolled the massive pallet of dark mulch toward the lawn. The smell hit me first, rich and earthy, sharp with pine and damp bark, a scent that felt like both burial and rebirth. Rebecca stood beside me, the permit folded in her hand like a quiet weapon. The forklift stopped just short of the oak's root line. The operator leaned out, eyes on me. I nodded once. The load tipped. Mulch spilled forward in a heavy wave, pouring across the crushed grass, filling the tire grooves, sliding toward the SUV's front bumper. The sound was deep and final, like soil hitting a coffin. The oak's lower branches brushed the top of the pile, leaves trembling. Another load followed. By the third dump, the front tires of Evan's SUV were already swallowed halfway up the rims. The ground that had been scarred for weeks was disappearing beneath a rising shield of dark brown. Across the street, Karen's front door flew open. She stormed down her steps in heels that sank into the pavement cracks, hair loose, phone clutched in her hand. Her mouth was already moving, the shape of shouting, though I couldn't hear the words over the engines. "What do you think you're doing?" she screamed as she reached the curb. I stepped forward, holding the permit out where she could see it. She didn't look at it. "That's my son's car," she shouted. "You can't touch it, you can't—" The foreman cut the engine of the nearest truck. Silence fell hard, broken only by the distant gulls on the lake. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, "this is an authorized remediation project." Karen laughed, sharp and wild. "Authorized by who?" "By the city," I replied. She finally looked at the paper. Her face changed, not completely, but enough. She lunged for her phone, dialing as she paced the edge of the lawn, her shoes sinking slightly into the loose soil. "Get over here now," she snapped into the receiver. "They're destroying private property." Another truck advanced. More mulch poured. The SUV's hood disappeared beneath the rising mound. Only the roof and rear window remained visible now, like a dark island in a sea of earth. Neighbors began appearing. Mrs. Holloway first, then Mr. Benton, then the Ramirez family, standing together at the end of their driveway, hands over their mouths. Karen kept shouting. Her voice cracked. She waved her arms, pointing at me, at the trucks, at the oak, at the sky. The sound of sirens approached. 2 police cars pulled in, lights flashing, red and blue painting the mulch, the oak, the SUV, Karen's face. An officer stepped out, hand on his belt, eyes scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked. Karen rushed him, words tumbling over each other, pointing at me like an accusation made flesh. I waited until she ran out of breath. Then I handed him the permit. He read it, slowly, carefully. His partner walked the edge of the lawn, knelt, pressed his palm into the compacted soil that still showed beyond the mulch, then into the fresh pile, comparing. He looked up at me. "This vehicle was parked here?" he asked. "Yes. Daily," Tom's voice came from behind the growing crowd. Karen spun. "You!" she hissed. Tom stepped forward, his shoulders straight, his face pale but steady. "It's been damaging protected soil, the buffer zone. I warned you." Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The officer folded the permit and handed it back to me. "This work is lawful," he said. "The vehicle is illegally parked on private property in a restricted area." Karen's phone slipped from her hand and hit the pavement. The foreman looked at me. "Continue?" I nodded. The final load tipped. Mulch surged forward, burying the SUV's roof, erasing the last trace of it. 3 tons of dark earth sealed the ground where that car had once claimed dominance. Karen stood frozen, her face drained of color, the realization finally breaking through her fury. The oak's leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and for the first time in weeks, the ground beneath my feet felt like it was breathing again. That calm lasted about 30 seconds. Cars began lining the street from both directions as neighbors arrived in clusters, drawn by the trucks, the police lights, and the impossible sight of an SUV swallowed by a mountain of mulch. The cul-de-sac filled with voices, phones raised, people standing on porches and lawns, a living audience to what Karen Whitfield had unleashed. Karen recovered from her shock with a kind of wild fury. She shoved past the nearest officer and pointed at me, her finger trembling. This is vandalism. He planned this. He's trying to bankrupt the association. He's trying to ruin my family. The officer didn't react. He simply repeated, "The work is authorized." Karen turned to the crowd. "You're all going to pay for this, every one of you. When the HOA raises fees to cover this insanity, remember his face." Murmurs spread through the group. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. Mr. Benton folded his arms, jaw tight. The Ramirez kids whispered to each other, eyes wide. I stepped forward. "They won't raise fees for this. They'll raise them when the drainage fails and floods your homes. That's what this prevents." Karen laughed, shrill. "You think you know better than the board." "I know better than gravity," I said, "and so does the city." She turned on Tom. "You did this? You fed him lies." Tom stood still, hands at his sides, his voice carrying more than I'd ever heard from him before. "I told you the truth. You ignored it." Karen's face contorted. "You're fired." Tom didn't blink. "Then I'm free." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone clapped once, then another, then several more. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, searching for allies. She found none. Her phone rang. She answered on the second ring, pacing the edge of the mulch mound. Yes, I know, I see it. He's manipulating everyone." She listened, her posture stiffening, the color drained from her cheeks. "What do you mean the insurer wants an explanation?" She turned away from the crowd, her voice dropping. "No, I didn't authorize any illegal parking. Of course not. He's lying." She stopped pacing. Her shoulders sagged. I heard enough. So did the people closest to her. When she ended the call, she stood very still, staring at the buried SUV, then at the oak, then at the neighbors. "They're sending someone," she said. The fight was leaving her now. "An investigator." I nodded. They should. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them addressed the crowd. "This is a civil matter, but any interference with authorized work will be documented." No one moved. Karen looked at me again, her voice hoarse. "You could have just paid the fines." "And let the Benton's basement fill with water," I replied. "Let your son crush protected land. Let this neighborhood absorb the damage while you pretended nothing was happening." She shook her head, almost to herself. "You didn't have to humiliate me." "You humiliated yourself." The crowd leaned in, the tension thick, the moment bigger than all of us. I felt Rebecca's hand slip into mine. I could hear the oak's leaves overhead, soft, steady, alive. Karen took a step toward the mulch mound and stopped. Her heels sank slightly. The ground no longer supported her the way it once had. The inspector from the city arrived, clipboard in hand, already speaking with the officers. He walked the site, nodded, made notes. Then he turned to Karen. "You've been cited for allowing repeated vehicle parking in a protected drainage buffer," he said, "and for issuing enforcement actions in conflict with city code." Her mouth opened, closed. Further investigation will follow. The crowd was silent now, watching her absorb it. She looked smaller than she had that morning, smaller than she had any day I'd known her. I met her eyes. "This isn't over, but it isn't yours anymore." She didn't answer. As the sun lowered, the police cars rolled away. The trucks finished their work. The mulch mound stood where the SUV had once ruled my lawn. Neighbors lingered, talking in low voices, their world shifted, their fear loosening its grip. Karen retreated across the street, alone, the crowd parting around her. That night, Cedar Hollow felt different, not quieter, lighter, like a storm had finally broken and the air could move again. I stood in the community center the next evening, the same place where board meetings were usually stiff and scripted, now packed with neighbors filling every chair and lining the walls. The smell of coffee, sweat, paper, and nervous anticipation hung in the air. Karen sat at the long table with the rest of the board. Her posture was rigid. The confidence that once radiated from her had drained away, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. Tom stood at the back near the exit, hands clasped in front of him, shoulders steady. The insurer's representative spoke first, calm, clinical, devastating. The unauthorized parking, the buffer violations, the selective enforcement, the risk exposure. Each point landed like a hammer on old glass. Then the city's compliance officer followed, confirming everything Tom and I already knew. The oak, the slope, the runoff, the liability. Karen tried to interrupt. No one listened. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I described the land the way an engineer does, but also the way a son does. I told them about my father, about the time capsule beneath the oak, about Tom's wife resting in the shade of that tree when she was too tired to walk any farther. I spoke about the Benton's foundation, about the Ramirez kids' bedrooms downhill, about what happens when rules are treated like suggestions instead of safeguards. The room stayed silent. Then Mrs. Holloway stood. Then Mr. Benton. Then the Ramirezes. Stories poured out. Fines. Threats. Fear. The pattern of control Karen had built finally came into the open where it couldn't hide. The vote was swift. Karen Whitfield was removed from the board. All related fines were voided. An interim board was appointed on the spot, with a full audit scheduled and the insurance carrier overseeing the transition. New enforcement standards were adopted before the meeting even ended. When the gavel came down, something inside me finally released. Outside, the lake reflected the moon in long silver lines. The oak's leaves whispered in the breeze. The mulch mound sat where the SUV had once claimed dominance, now shaped into a protective berm, anchoring the soil, restoring the buffer, protecting the slope. A week later, the specialty crew excavated Evan's SUV. Karen paid the bill in full. She never looked at me. Tom didn't lose his job. The new board offered him a permanent role overseeing grounds compliance, with authority he'd never had before. When he told me, his eyes were bright. He stood beneath the oak afterward, just breathing, the way he said his wife used to. The first real storm came 2 days later. Heavy rain. Wind off the lake. I stood on the porch with Rebecca, watching the water move exactly where it was supposed to, sliding cleanly down the restored channel, disappearing into the storm basin without touching the Benton's foundation, without creeping toward the Ramirez place, without suffocating the oak's roots. The land remembered how it was meant to work. I knelt once more at the base of the tree, brushed the soil from the trunk, and pressed my hand to the ground. Beneath it, my father's time capsule rested undisturbed, safe, home. Some battles don't end with cheers. They end with quiet, with stability, with families sleeping through storms they never have to think about again. Before I went inside, I turned on my phone and spoke to the camera, the lake behind me, the oak at my side. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. I ended the recording, slid the phone into my pocket, and went back inside. The war was over. The ground was breathing. And for the first time since Karen Whitfield decided she owned our lives, Cedar Hollow belonged to its people again.